This is Jason DeBoard with the Original Prop blog. Today we're doing our 12th annual year-in review. So you're looking at last year's article, which is why it says the 11th annual for 2017. This is for 2018. This is the first year we're doing this in video format. As I mentioned when I started publishing these YouTube features, this is really going to be the primary method of delivering features to readers and followers of the Original Prop blog going forward, with the exception of some things like calendars, which wouldn't make for a very interesting YouTube video. But this is really what I want to try to stick with going into 2019, and really the last couple months have been more of a setup going into 2019 more than anything else. So hopefully they'll get better as we go along. This is totally unscripted. Basically, I kind of just reviewed the year, made some notes, pulled up some websites that I'm going to be taking a look at and reading from as we go through this list. I actually changed the order of some of the items right before I started recording this. So I thought we would try to do it quickly because I could probably spend an hour on each of these 10 items, which, I don't even want to make a 10-hour video, let alone watch it. So I'm going to try to keep it short. So to set the stage for this year's list, I thought we'd do a quick rundown of last year's top 10 just for context and to even refresh my own memory. Number 10 was the progress on the Academy Museum of Motion Pictures, which actually there wasn't really a lot of progress last year. Number 9 pertained to the anti-fraud autograph legislation in California, which was on the list of the year before and kept evolving. Wasn't really a great law, in my opinion. Good intentions, bad execution. Number 8 was looking at the Debbie Reynolds and Carrie Fisher auction by Profiles in History. Number 7 was taking note of 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray discs kind of coming into their own and becoming much more mainstream, and that they can be an excellent tool for research and authentication because you have all that extra resolution. Number 6 was mentioning prop stores' success with their live auctions, which they'd been doing for several years at that point. But I think last year was the year they really came into their own and really had a lot of success that put them in a position to really be on an equal playing field with a lot of the big auction houses that have been doing this for much, much, much longer. Number 5 was a commentary about some interesting auction results. Number 4 also was about that in a different way, basically making note of Bonham's world record of $5.375 million with their Robbie the Robot prop from Forbidden Planet. Number 3 was talking about the FBI and mainstream media and their interest, and usually they have a lack of interest in any kind of memorabilia fraud outside of sports memorabilia. So entertainment, Hollywood memorabilia, not so much, but when they do actually take notice, I put a highlight on that. Number 2 was more subjective on my part, just some cringeworthy videos pertaining to this art market. I had 2 examples there. And number 1 was about, funny enough, lightsabers. Last year, Brandon Allinger had showcased his absolutely authentic Return of the Jedi Luke Skywalker lightsaber on Mark Hamill's Pop Culture Quest, which was cool. And then on the flip side, we had an auction from Bonham's where they had a lightsaber that they had attributed to Luke Skywalker and Return of the Jedi, which I actually pulled this up since it was the number 1 item last year. I'd done an article about this. It was in one of their auctions. It had an estimate of $150,000 to $250,000. and it was a piece that I'd seen come up before in, I believe, an eBay auction. I'm trying to refresh my memory as I scroll down here. Yeah, as I said, this is totally unscripted, totally. I'm just kind of doing this as I go along. Yeah, so there was this one that had previously appeared in an eBay auction, had some really strange paperwork and documentation. So I raised a bunch of questions. I literally, I think, ended this article with a series of questions for Bonhams. Scrolling. Yeah, my open questions to Bonham. So I had these series of questions. This was published on November 3rd, 2017, and then November 9th, 2017, it was withdrawn. So my number one last year was kind of just taking a look at the same item, just sort of a good example and a bad example. So let's get on to this year's list. So number 10 is kind of a collage of interesting auctions, I thought. We had Russell Crowe, The Art of Divorce auction by Sotheby's Australia. And this was interesting to me just because it had kind of a morbid title, but I guess funny too, in a way. It's put on by Sotheby's Australia, which I don't remember ever seeing a memorabilia, like entertainment memorabilia auction put on by Sotheby's Australia. It got a lot of interesting press. There was some really good stuff in this auction, so I'm not knocking the auction at all. It was a lot of incredible material directly from Russell Crowe's collection. But it was just sort of this morbid, dark kind of pitch for the auction. And then also Sotheby's had Robin Williams auction. So again, it was kind of on darker circumstances, I guess you could say. The collection of material is awesome. A portion of the proceeds benefited some really incredible organizations. So, I mean, it was a great auction, but it's just, it's sad that, Robin Williams is gone, and, you're kind of celebrating his work via this auction, but it's, obviously we'd rather have Robin Williams still with us. So that was kind of interesting. Then the third one in this kind of list, I don't really know. I mean, it's my top 10. For me, it's just sort of interesting auctions. They're just different auctions, and they're not put on by sort of the usual auction houses. It was this collection of Stanley Kubrick memorabilia, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce the auction house's name. I'm not really good with Italian, but it was another really incredible collection of material. I believe this was from the collection of his assistant. Yeah, this came from his assistant, but it's really interesting stuff. So my top 10 is just sort of these three interesting auctions. So my number 9 for 2018 is this lawsuit brought against Profiles in History over a Tony Soprano costume that was from the final episode of The Sopranos. So, at the time I read this lawsuit, and, I'm very pro buyer, but it just did not make any sense to me. Like I said, I'm going to try to keep this short. If you're interested, obviously I'm going to have links in the original prop blog article to all of these past articles that I'm showing you, but it's just a really strange auction. It seemed a little bit like buyer's remorse to me. Just, I'm totally speculating here, but, I went through the complaint, and it just, in this case, I really felt Profiles in History did not do anything wrong. And I didn't really agree with the ideas behind the complaint. He was basically complaining that a Sopranos costume was kind of portrayed as the costume. And then and he had paid $22,000 at auction in 2013. And then a similar costume went up for auction many years later in 2017. And it had a pre-sale estimate of $4,000 to $6,000. and it did not even sell for the reserve or the low estimate. I'm not sure what the reserve was, but the low estimate was $4,000. It went unsold. So, he paid $22,000 for a costume in 2013, and essentially a duplicate costume didn't sell for $4,000 4 years later. So that's unfortunate, but that's kind of this market. I mean, that's kind of the risk you take when you buy high-end movie and television memorabilia. And I kind of cited these articles I wrote a long time ago about the hype premium, where when The Sopranos ends, there's all this hype about it because it's in the news and everyone wants a piece of it. And then years later, people just aren't as interested, and the pricing is going to be different typically. So I didn't know what happened with this. This was early in the year. This was back in January of 2018. So I actually looked up this case to see what happened. And, I'm not an attorney, thank God. But it looks like the complainant put in a request to dismiss the action. So that happened beginning in February. So not shortly after the original complaint was filed, a week or two later. And, it looks like that request for dismissal kind of went through the process. And that's the end of the case. So, that was kind of my take on it, was that there was nothing there. It was unfortunate for the guy who bought the piece and then saw that the value had kind of dropped out. But, like I said, that's sort of just the nature of this, this art market. So, I think it's a learning lesson for everyone. I mean, it's a good reminder for everyone that that's something that can happen. Prices go up, prices go down based on things that happen, changes in interest, whatever. But that's really just the nature of this market. So that's my number 9. So number 8 is an interesting one. My number 8 has to do with this James Bond gun that was up for auction. So this was completely off my radar. Somehow I completely missed this whole episode that was transpiring in late November. You can see here, this was on November 27th. The BBC's reporting about this James Bond pistol going up for auction. It says a handgun handed to Sean Connery in the opening scenes of Dr. No in 1962 is to be auctioned. The Walther PPK pistol was owned at the time by M actor Bernard Lee, who brought it on set when a prop was not available. A letter signed by Lee confirms the then fully active gun was, quote, the first ever to appear in a James Bond film. Auctioneer Jonathan Humbert described the piece as, quote, a superlative piece of British film history. So, this, you probably know where this is going. This was pulled from auction. So I don't have the original auction listing to even reference anymore. I just have these news articles. So basically this was really pushed in the media. This is not just one news outlet that was reporting on this auction. There's many, but somehow I still missed it. So it said this firearm is expected to fetch as much as 80,000 pounds in the auction, which is probably over $100,000 US. I'm not sure what the exchange rate is right now. So this was on November 27th. November 30th, there's a new BBC article. James Bond gun withdrawn from auction over fake row. So then there's this article that talks about how this was pulled from auction, which I'm not going to read because if you really want to understand what happened with this piece, I would recommend going to the website and forum AJB007. And again, like I said, I'm going to have links to all this in my article. So you can read this 4 pages of posts back and forth between James Bond fans and some real experts talking about this auction. And basically, what it comes down to is what was up for auction was a PPK, and apparently in the early Bond films, it was a PP, a Walther PP. And there are differences between the PP and the PPK. So if you read through this, there's a lot of discussion about this. And there are gentlemen here who wrote to the auction house and who wrote to the BBC about those articles reporting on the auction. So I'd advise you to check this out. One of the participants on the forum is the author of the book, The Most Famous Gun in the World, A History of 007's Weapons on the Silver Screen. And I believe he has another book that he has published. There's some screen caps showing close-ups of the pistol as seen in the film. And anyway, check this out. Like I said, I'm trying to keep it short, but it's a really interesting read. It's another example of a really high-end piece being put up for auction by an auction house, and then kind of people, third party, completely uninvolved, sharing their research, their knowledge, and then the pieces withdrawn from auction. So it's really interesting if you're interested in movie props, if you're interested in James Bond, if you're interested in the media and how they cover these issues, if you're interested in how auction houses react to people giving them information that's counter to what is in the catalog description of a high-end item, it's a really interesting read. Number 7, this is another news piece that I failed to cover on my original prop blog website. I was planning to do a video, and it just, in terms of timing, didn't really come together, and I just thought, okay, I'm going to cover this in my end of the year feature. So that's what I'm doing right now. This is my number 7, the stolen ruby slippers used in Wizard of Oz recovered by FBI. This is reporting by Reuters. And it's interesting. I think a lot of people in the hobby are aware of this pair of ruby slippers that were stolen from the Judy Garland Museum 13 years ago. So they were recovered this year by the FBI, and they basically found them. Now, that's the easy part of the story. I'm still completely unclear about exactly what happened. I've read a lot of news accounts about it, and there's also a press release. So that, I'm not going to read this whole article. I'm going to put a link in the description. You can read it. You can try to make sense of it. Then they put out this press release. This is on the FBI.gov website. It talks about the Judy Garland ruby slippers. They were in the museum. They talk about how there's 4 pairs in existence. This was the, quote, traveling pair. And there's been this ongoing investigation. Basically, the owner, I believe, was paid by the insurance company once they were found to be a complete loss. The police investigation didn't turn up anything. So now the FBI have found them. And I believe they're technically the property then of the insurance company, since they paid out the previous owners. So that's basically something I'm setting aside, because beyond that, it's just speculation. I don't really know what the status is, who the actual legal owner is today, but it's obviously kind of a complicated situation. They had this press conference. There's this quote that says, "There are certainly people out there who have additional knowledge regarding both the theft and the individuals responsible for concealing the slippers all these years. We are asking that you come forward." So it sounds like there's still some mystery with this, and they have the missing slippers in hand, but it sounds like they still aren't exactly sure who stole them, or maybe they know some and just they don't know everyone that was involved. So it's still kind of a mystery. It's funny, I've actually had 2 different people from the mainstream media contact me about this, and I basically told them, look, I don't really follow this FBI news release. It's kind of confusing, and they actually have agreed with me. So I guess it's not just me. There's journalists out there, real journalists, who are much smarter than me, and they're having some trouble kind of piecing together what this is as well. The good news is they've recovered them. And there's an interesting piece on the PBS NewsHour website. And again, I'll put a link. And this is really interesting because it talks about how there's the 4 pairs out there, and they did this real forensic analysis of the ones in the Smithsonian, which don't actually, they're not a matching pair. They're both authentic, but it's like they're both sets of a different pair. And then these ones that were recovered by the FBI are the missing matching pieces. So it's really interesting from that standpoint. And also, there's a lot of information here about the technology that they've used to identify these pieces and match them, and make sure that they're authentic. So this is an excellent article. I can't recommend enough. Anyone who's interested in movie props, you should just go check this out, even if you don't care about Wizard of Oz. It's just super interesting. So great work by PBS in putting together this article following these pieces being found. This is actually more interesting to me than kind of the criminal aspect is their analysis. And it's just super interesting. So check this out. I talked about this in a recent YouTube, the Prop Store TV Treasures live auction curated by the Commissar Collection. I had a pretty candid review of the auction itself. I don't think it had the results that they were expecting. The catalog was beautiful. It's one of the best catalogs I've ever seen since I've been collecting. Maybe the best. I just love that catalog. But I'm making note of it here because I think the fact that James Commissar put out some of his collection in this auction indicates that there might be more coming, and he has obviously the world's best and biggest collection of TV props, costumes, memorabilia. So that's interesting for the future. So this is just more of a one to watch. So that's that. That's my number 6. So my number 5 is actually pretty similar. In the summer, Profiles in History did this auction that featured material from the Planet Hollywood collection. And like the James Commissar collection, this would be more on the film side. This massive collection, Planet Hollywood has so much stuff. So again, it's kind of a situation where it's a development where it's interesting to look to the future to see if more of this collection comes to market via auction. So that's my number 5, just what's going to happen with this Planet Hollywood collection. So my number 4. Now, as I mentioned, every year I tend to put the Academy Museum of Motion Pictures as one of my top 10 items of interest every year. And this is the first year it's moved way up the list because it's actually coming together. It's supposed to be, I think it's supposed to be opening next year in 2019. So they've really put some work into the website. It's really kind of starting to give you an idea of what this is going to look like, what this experience is going to be like. You can get on their mailing list. They have this coming in 2019 banner. I've driven by the building, not recently, but it's always been under construction and coming together. And this is just marketing, but it really looks like they could be doing this the right way. Like this gives me a lot of hope and expectation that this is going to be a really awesome museum. It'll be like the first really big, museum that's just going to cover all eras, all disciplines, all areas of art, costumes, props, everything. So, this is really a huge development. I have a feeling this could be my number 1 item of 2019. So, I'm really looking forward to seeing how this comes together next year. It looks incredible. So I'm super excited about this. I really hope the best for this project. I hope all involved really make this happen in a way that will really exceed everyone's expectations. So that's my number 4. Number 3 is a sad one. Screen Used closed this year, just back in September. I wasn't aware that this was coming. It was kind of just out of the blue, out of left field. They'd been doing what they do, they've been doing for a very long time. They had just had an auction. They'd been in business for 15 years. Jeff and Desi are amazing, amazing guys. Super honest, super knowledgeable, really good businessmen. When I was starting out collecting, every day I would hit the Screen Used website. That was sort of the thing we all did, however many years ago that was, 15 years ago. I think that's about when I started, really getting into this stuff, was when their website was just coming out. And every morning you'd be F5ing the Screen Used website to see what the cool high-end stuff is that was going to be listed that day. And if it's something really good, you're going to try to buy it before anyone else does. It was a really cool thing. I bought a lot of my really, really early stuff from Screen Used. They were awesome. They were so helpful. I've met Desi in person many, many times. Awesome guy. I love Desi. Jeff, I met in person, I think just once. Really nice guy. Really enjoyed meeting him in person. So this is just sad. I mean, I wish the best for them. I know they're both, moving on to other things. I know they're both still involved in collecting, because I see them pop up, talking about stuff on Facebook periodically. But I just wanted to make note that these guys were awesome. They did it right. Loved Screen Used. Like, they were awesome. Their COAs meant something. Like, if there was a problem, they were going to stand behind it. And they just did everything right. They're real pioneers in this field. And, I'm sad to see that it closed, but, I really want to celebrate what they did and all these great pieces they brought to people's collections. And they just did it in a real professional way. And I can't say enough nice things about Screen Used. I love these guys. So that's my number 3. So my number 2 is kind of just, I don't like to highlight negative stuff very much, to be honest, believe it or not. But, this year we had Profiles in History. Back in May, they had put up for auction an Obi-Wan Kenobi lightsaber from Star Wars: A New Hope. And I had seen people talking about this like immediately as soon as that catalog came out. And I did this article kind of pointing to the RPF and some questions about the piece. And, it was either later that night or the next day. I guess it was later that night, because both my articles are dated May 3rd. It was like pretty much immediately pulled from auction. So, that was good that they pulled it, because I believe some people had identified it as a specific replica made by a specific prop replica maker. So that was in May. And then over the summer, that Luke Skywalker lightsaber attributed to A New Hope popped up at San Diego Comic-Con at their display. And then that came up for the auction that was scheduled for earlier this month. And, I did a bunch of YouTube videos about that piece. And Roger Christian even responded to one of them. He was the gentleman who consigned it to auction. He was literally the person who made the Luke Skywalker A New Hope lightsabers for the film. So there's just a lot of discussion about this one. And then it was pulled shortly before the auction. And, it's just, I don't want to say too much about this, but to have 2 really high-end lightsabers in 2 separate auctions in the same year that were put up for auction and then pulled, it's just, it doesn't do a lot of good for the hobby overall. Like, I don't like to see that. I know other collectors don't like to see it. Other auction houses don't like to see it. So it just seems like if you have something like a Star Wars lightsaber, just as Bonhams did last year, which was my number 1 in my top 10 last year was part of that note, was that if you have a Star Wars lightsaber that's worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, and there are all these resources available and experts available to help authenticate it, no matter who it comes from, no matter what kind of paperwork it comes with, or who might be bringing it to auction, it really requires a lot of scrutiny, because obviously, since I've been doing the original prop blog in 2007, I've done so many articles about lightsabers at auction, either on eBay or public auction. There has to be a point at which this isn't working. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents. That's my number 2 for 2018 out of my top 10. So number 1 is, it's a sad thing to talk about, the passing of Paul Allen, but I'm not really looking at it from that perspective. I never met Paul Allen. I don't really know that much about Paul Allen. Interestingly, though, he's someone who was very wealthy, very successful, and I've never heard anyone say anything negative about him. I've never seen anyone write anything negative about him. So, I think that says a lot, because when people are successful and or people have wealth, they become a target, especially in this culture. People want to tear people down who are doing better than them. And, I've never heard anything bad about Paul Allen. And, as people know, he was a huge, huge collector of movie memorabilia, movie props, movie costumes. He was a big buyer. He was seen as a big buyer. Like, anytime some big science fiction piece came up, it's like his involvement as a bidder really had a dramatic impact on the hammer price, because he was one of the big buyers out there that was really driving this market. And, that is kind of a good thing. A lot of people say, oh no, high prices are bad, but it's good because so if something sells for a lot of money at auction, you can guarantee that it's going to be taken care of and preserved. And, that's a good thing, because these are pieces of our pop culture history and heritage. So, he's been such a force in this art market, but kind of quietly in the background. So this was another one I didn't do an article about at the time. I knew it was going to be something that I really wanted to talk about at the end of the year. So, what else did Paul Allen do? He's the only person who's really succeeded in actually creating a real museum. So many people have tried. Debbie Reynolds tried several times. James Commissar's tried for years. But Paul Allen, he actually did it. And I've been there, and it's awesome. And it's always changing. And it's not just movies and television. It's also rock and roll. I haven't been there for years, so I'm not exactly sure what it's like today. But he also does traveling museums. So, not only does he have his museum in Seattle, but he would put stuff out on tour. So, I had an opportunity to see one of these myself in California way back in 2009 at the California Museum. I went in there and checked out what he had on exhibit. And I took a bunch of pictures. You can see this on my website. I'll put up links. But, the guy, he loved this stuff, and it wasn't about him putting it in a box in his closet or something. He wants to share it with people. And I just thought that was awesome. That's the ideal thing when something goes up for auction, is that someone like Paul Allen will buy it and share it with the world. So, I thought that was a really cool thing. I went there and checked it out. I really enjoyed myself. I wasn't 100% certain that every single thing I saw was authentic, but that's another topic. And then I also went up to Seattle back in, 2012, and checked out the actual museum. Again, it was just super impressive. You can see it's right by the Space Needle. incredible building. I mean, the building itself is a piece of art. And then he's got all this stuff inside of it. So again, I've got all these pictures up on my website. You can check it out. I really hope to get there again sometime soon, just because I know that's the other thing, is he always having these different exhibits and changing things out. It's pretty awesome. The funny thing is, this Mr. Pointy Steak from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, I used to own this. So I'm walking through this museum, and I put it up for auction years ago, and you sell something, you don't know what happens to it. And there it is. And I'm like, oh my God, that's just amazing. Like, it made me glad I sold it because other people could enjoy it. I thought that was really awesome. So, that's my number one for 2018. Like I said, I mean, it's really tragic that Paul Allen passed away, but I just wanted to celebrate what the guy has done for this art market, on so many different levels, and the fact that his efforts will carry on beyond him. I mean, this is stuff that people are going to enjoy for generations. So, I just want to give my gratitude to Mr. Allen for what he has done, for this art market and for kind of protecting our pop culture history and our memories and these, crazy and silly shows that we enjoy and cherish. And, it's an example of someone really doing for other people and for pop culture at large. So, kudos to Paul Allen, and thanks for watching this video. If you have any top 10 things of your own that I overlooked, top 10 news stories or developments or whatever from this crazy prop and costume collecting world, I'd like to hear what you think. Feel free to post a comment or, reach out to me via email. That'd be awesome. Thanks again, everyone. And hopefully in 2019, I'll get this YouTube thing down and make some good content that will be educational and hopefully entertaining. So thank you.